What is going on, everybody? I am back today to talk about the next installment in the Alien franchise. And if you've not been paying attention, since the release of Alien Romulus, I decided to go back and rewatch the entire Alien series. And it's been a ton of fun. I've watched Alien, Aliens, and Alien Romulus. And today I'm going to talk about possibly the most hated entry in the franchise next to Resurrection, Alien 3. In this movie, there are a ton of hot takes out there about this film. There are people that absolutely despise this, think that it destroyed the entirety of the Alien universe. And this is directed by none other than David Fincher, who I think is one of the greatest working directors right now. And he has historically said that this is the only film in his filmography that he despises. He doesn't like the way that it turned out. There was a lot done that was taken away from him, very similar to David Lynch in the way that he feels about Dune. And there were a ton of rewrites and reshoots and all different things that happened with this movie. And there are two different versions of Alien 3. There's the original theatrical cut and there's the assembly cut. And I have seen both versions a couple of times. It's been several years since I've seen this movie, but I've always preferred the assembly cut. I feel like it explains a lot more. It seems more in line with how David Fincher discusses his original vision for the film. So I'm going to be reviewing the assembly cut of Alien 3 today, which is the version I would recommend that you check out if you watch the movie, and I'm looking forward to talking about it with you today. Alien 3 is directed by David Fincher. After escaping with Newt and Hicks from the alien planet, Ripley crash lands on Fiorina 161, a prison planet and host to a correctional facility. Unfortunately, although Newt and Hicks do not survive the crash, a more unwelcome visitor does. The prison does not allow weapons of any kind, and with aid being a long time away, the prisoners must simply survive in any way they can. So, I was actually really looking forward to revisiting this movie because of all the hatred kind of surrounding it and the way people perceive this film. And I have a very hot take about this movie. I enjoy Alien 3, the assembly cut, more than I enjoy Aliens. And I know a lot of people out there are going to say that that's blasphemy and that that's horrible, but I think this movie tonally matches what Ridley Scott did with the original Alien far more than Aliens does. Is this a perfect movie? Absolutely not. The CGI is absolutely abysmal. The editing is kind of all over the place. There are pacing issues with the film. There are definitely its fair share of problems. But I think even in the moments where the film falls short, the strongest parts of the movie shine through. And I'm really excited to discuss this film with you today. So at the beginning of Alien 3, we see Ripley crash land on this prison planet. And these prisoners rescue her from the ship, and she's awoken in a medical bay by Clemens, played by Charles Dance, who tells her that everyone on her ship has died. And she's completely and totally distraught by it, and he begins to explain to her that they are on this prison planet and that all of the prisoners on this planet are men. Most of them have gone to jail for things like rape, assault, violence. They're just terrible, despicable human beings. And there's only, I think they said there's 25 to 30 of them left on this planet, but they've all found God. There's a religious head, Dylan, played by Charles S. Dutton, who is attempting to keep all of the prisoners in line. And we get introduced to all of these different prisoners, the head of the prison, and kind of how it operates. And Ripley, though distraught by the news of Newt and Hicks's death, wants to get an autopsy done on Newt to make sure that she was not inhabited by one of the xenomorphs. And they perform an autopsy, and she's thrilled to find out that that did not happen. But in the assembly cut, some of the prisoners bring an ox in from outside that they're going to cut up for meat for the prisoners, and a face hugger has implanted itself in this dead ox, and a xenomorph is born. And the entirety of the film is this group of prisoners trying to survive this xenomorph with no weapons, no anything. They have to essentially outsmart it to survive. So as I said, I actually like this film more than Aliens. I think that it nails a more horror-centric tone. I think that the way it builds tension and suspense, the isolation on this prison planet, I am far more invested in this story than I was in the action schlock tone of aliens. I'm going to address the first thing that everyone's going to ask me about, and that's the death of Newton Hicks. And to be completely honest with you, I do not care. I know a ton of people that were attached to aliens when the movie originally came out. They cared so much for those characters and were completely and totally distraught by their death. This movie is depressing. It is dour. It is supposed to be a horror film. So having a shocking opening like that, I commend David Fincher for not pulling any punches. I think it makes the film so much more of a gut punch in the first 5 minutes to do something like that. And the other thing, I saw someone pose this question on Letterboxd, and I think that it's really well stated. Would you want Newt to be alive on this prison planet filled with all these men who have not seen a woman, let alone a child, where they essentially say a lot of the prisoners are child predators and rapists? And it's so fascinating to me that that was one of the things that really off-put people to this movie, was that they killed off those characters in the beginning. I could not care less. I don't think that it does anything to change the story. And if anything, it gives Sigourney Weaver more of an opportunity to shine. And this is one of my favorite performances that she delivers in the entirety of the franchise so far. She is such a headstrong badass in this movie with literally nothing to lose. She doesn't even really want to be alive anymore. The alien, despite the fact that she's been in cryo sleep for so long, and this is in total has been probably about a month of her life, it feels like it's never ending. Every time she wakes up and tries to get her life on track, it's completely thwarted because of these aliens and because of the Weyland-Yutani Corporation. And she has so many incredible scenes in this movie that just showcase her really fantastic acting talent. And she just pulls no punches. There's a scene that was included in the assembly cut that she's like wandering through this hallway alone, and she kind of has this monologue to herself. I think it's one of the best sequences of dialogue in any of the Alien films. I really like all of the prisoners on this planet, and what's so great about it is they're all just evil, awful human beings, and so you're not really rooting for any of them outside of Sigourney Weaver. I do like Clemens's character a lot, and they give him a little bit of a tragic backstory, but there's like a prisoner on the planet who's kind of like losing his mind, and it's really interesting to see. And then the correlation of like religion and how these people are trying to shift their lives around and how it impacts each and every one of them. I think they could have delved into that a little bit deeper, but I really like the way that it plays in with the film overall, because the one becomes infatuated with the xenomorph and essentially sees it as like a godlike being. And I think that's a really interesting approach in the movie thematically. And I really like when the movie lingers on those ideas. I love the production design in this movie. I think it is so awesome. It's very run down and gross looking. Everything feels very lived in, similarly to what I said about Ridley Scott's Alien and James Cameron's Aliens. I really love the environment of this. There's something so horrifying about this creature who is so powerful and virtually unstoppable, and you have to try to kill it on this prison with no weapons at your disposal, virtually nothing to help you survive. And there's something deeply horrific about that. And I love the way that Fincher approaches that in this movie. Not to mention Sigourney Weaver's character. They say a lot of these men haven't seen a woman in like 20 plus years. And so it's really interesting to think about her not only having to survive the xenomorph, but having to survive these men and fight them off. And there's one scene where a bunch of the men turn on her, and it's really like disturbing at its core. And I think that's what makes this movie so horrific, is the idea that you're stranded in the middle of nowhere with all of these convicted criminals. And I think that that's such a neat approach. I like the way this is shot and edited for the most part. There's some editing that's a little bit jarring. There's a couple of sequences that they do through the POV of the alien that can be a little nauseating at times, but I can excuse it for the most part because it's a fun little change from the first two films. My biggest issue with this movie is the CGI is abysmal. This was in 1992, I believe, so this was when CGI was first kind of being introduced into the film industry, and everyone wanted something to do with it. And the compositing on the xenomorph in this is horrible. The sizing doesn't match up. It moves in a very unnatural way whenever it is computer generated, and it takes you out of the movie. I can see people being fed up with the compositing on that, because what makes the first two films so incredibly effective is if it's not a person in a suit and it's not like an animatronic or a puppet that someone has made, it's hidden in the shadows. And what David Fincher does in specific scenes in this movie is shoots it through the POV of the alien, which I think would have been way better to just leave it at that than to go to those composited CGI shots, because the practical effects in this movie are some of the strongest in the series so far. Whenever it is a practical animatronic or a person in a costume, it looks amazing. It is some of my favorite xenomorphs in the series thus far, but anytime you get to that composited CGI figure, it is a complete and utter mess. There are some nonsensical decisions made in the third act that are kind of head scratchingly baffling. Some of the dialogue is a little cringy, and I'm not completely sold on it. But why I like this movie more than Aliens is, like I said, as soon as Aliens hits that action schlock tone, I find no suspense or horror or thrills in it. And when it's just people running with guns at the aliens, I just get relatively bored. And the dialogue in Aliens is miserable in a lot of sequences. I can't stand like the military jargon. I can't stand Bill Paxton's character. And as many incredible set pieces that are in that movie, I get pulled out because it doesn't feel like Alien. This movie, despite the numerous amount of flaws that it has, feels like an Alien movie. It feels like it fits in with everything that's been leading up to it at this point, and that's what I respect so much about it. And what I look forward to in revisiting this film is it has really interesting characters, has a very unique setup. I feel like despite its 2 hour and 10-minute runtime, there are some moments that drag, but I think the story's really interesting. The way that they incorporate Weyland-Yutani and some of the ideas that they have surrounding the xenomorphs, it really grows what we already know in a very interesting way. And I know David Fincher is upset with how this movie turns out, but I find it really interesting how you can see so many elements of this film inspiring the greater works that he would make later on in his career. And it's just a really fun ride. I think so many people are hard on this solely for the Newton Hicks death at the beginning, and then obviously the ending of this film is very dour and depressing, but it's a horror movie, and I don't know why it took so many people out of it, or they think that it's so awful. And the original Alien 3, it's a little bit more jarring and it's not super cohesive, which is why I think the assembly cut is the version that you could probably watch. But I have a blast with this movie, and I think people are way too hard on it. So if you've seen Alien 3, did you love it? Did you hate it? Leave me a comment down below and let me know what you thought. I think this movie is a ton of fun. I had a blast with it watching it this time, and I can't wait to see it again. As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.